Well, recording is in progress, and this is Andrew Williams Jr. on June the 17th, 2023. Another Conversations with Andrew Williams Jr. today from Concord, Massachusetts. And we have a Concordian conversation coming up with Stuart Sinclair Weeks, the founder of the Center for American Studies at Concord. He'll be joining us here with a special guest, Mr. Calvin Pearson from Project 1619.org. Very special session with you. So, Stuart Sinclair Weeks, I'm going to hand the show over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, friends. And again, welcome, Calvin. So these are conversations with Andrew Williams Jr. and Concordian conversations. And we are in what many, not all, but many consider the center of the center of the center of the center. And that is Concord, the Monument Square where we are. And I'll let you have a little glimpse. And I'll show more. Monument Square is the center of Concord. Concord, for many, not all, is the center of Massachusetts and of our country. Our country, for better and for worse, a slippery slope it is the center of our world. In Concord Center, there are three prominent monuments devoted to men and to war. They seem to go together. Off in the delicate shadows of Monument Square, where we are three other monuments devoted to the woman, to a matriarchal people, and to peace. So we have a kind of a juxtaposition here. In German, one has the word Zwiegespräch, which means two speaking together, or I translate it in English as a heart to heart, between the masculine elements and the feminine elements, between women and men, between females and males. They say that if you want to undermine society, and I can imagine that at least some people understand that that is an agenda, you attack the family in all sorts of ways. At the head of the family are parents. And we hear that more people are getting divorced these days, couples, than married. So whatever is going on, it's undermining the head of the family, and thereby the family and the children, the generations to come. So I want to just take a half a minute walk so you can get the full sense of where we are. Then I want to come back and read some words by Ralph Abernathy, who was Dr. King's closest associate and brother, about his mother and his father, that they were different. His father wasn't his mother, and his mother wasn't his father. They were different, they were distinct, they had complementary roles to play to raise this remarkable son and family. And that's our focus today in this gathering here in the center of the center of the center of the center, is how we can enliven this Zwiegespräch, this heart to heart between men and women, between the masculine and the feminine, so that we can have healthy families, healthy communities, and a healthy nation and global and world. So I'm going to take a bit of a walk, give you a quick glimpse, and then I'll come back and read Ralph Abernathy's words. So in front of us is Monument Square. 3 monuments devoted to men and to war. The first one in front of us is World War I. The second one in the middle is the Civil War, or the war among the states. And the third monument at the very end, if you can see it, is to the Spanish-American War. These monuments are filled with quotes and scriptures and lovely sculpting and tributes. Justice is done to those who gave their lives. I'm about to show you the third monument that has been moved from where we were sitting to the woman. And that is here on my left. Pieta statue. This Pieta statue is the only replica of the Pieta, which is in St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, that is made with the same marble of the original Pieta. Number one, and number two, nobody knows how it got to Concord. So it's a bit of a mystery. But there in our midst with the Pieta that you just saw is Mother Mary, holding he who some consider to be if not the savior. So that's the first monument devoted to the mother. And the second one, devoted to a matriarchal people, is just in front of me. Jethro's tree. Near this spot, the ancient oak known as Jethro's tree, beneath which Major Simon Willard and his associates bought from the Indians the 6 miles of land square, ordered by the General Court for the plantation of Concord, September 12th, 1635. Massachusetts Bay Colony Tercentenary Commission. Not September 11th, unless they got it wrong, but September 12th. So this is the second monument devoted to matriarchal people. We just saw the monument devoted to the woman. Now I'm going to take you to the third monument devoted to peace. And this monument, which is knee-high to a grasshopper, many people could trip over it, not see it, notes the spot where the Concord jail stood, to which Thoreau resorted or was imprisoned for refusing to pay taxes to support the war against Mexico. The plaque here reads, Henry David Thoreau was imprisoned for 1 night in a jail on this site, 36, for refusing to recognize the right of the state in support of slavery, an episode made famous in his essay, Civil Disobedience. So once again, we are here in the center of the center of the center of the center. In front of us, I showed you 3 prominent monuments devoted to men and to war. Here in the delicate shadows of Monument Square are 3 other monuments nearly invisible, devoted to the woman, to matriarchal people, and to peace. And so we're talking about this heart-to-heart between the masculine and the feminine elements. And before I read Ralph Abernathy's words, I'll just make note that on July 4th, we'll be gathering with Indigenous grandmothers and grandfathers to take up the thread that was dropped at the Albany Congress in 1754. The Albany Congress brought delegates from the different colonies who had the question, how, given all of our differences and distinctness, can we confederate? We have to work together. And since the Iroquois chiefs or the chiefs of the Haudenosaunee nation had achieved federation, they sought their counsel. Our founding fathers, Franklin, Jefferson, Madison in particular, and Payne, took up much of the counsel of the Iroquois chiefs, which became part of our Confederation and later Constitution. But what they didn't take up is very pertinent to this conversation, and that is the role of women in their Confederation. And in the Iroquois Confederation, it was the women who decided whether the men went off to war. That is, they were decided whether the cause was worthy to sacrifice their sons and husbands and brothers and fathers. And if they felt it wasn't, they felt it was just politics as usual or male egos or whatever, they did not consent to war. And if the chiefs objected, the chiefs were dismissed. So there was the role of the life givers, the women, to ensure that life went on. So with that, I'm going to read these words, and then I'm going to invite you, Andrew and Calvin, if you wish, to offer your thoughts on Ralph Abernathy's characterization of his mother and his father. We're talking about how they can go together, how there can be a true marriage, a holy matrimony, a compact between the male and the female. Ralph Abernathy wrote about his father. He was stern, righteous. Whatever he was doing, my father always meant business. As I look back, I realized the degree to which he sacrificed his own life and pleasures to the greater good of others and built a secure life for the family. David, if you ever see a good fight, get in it and win it. I learned about strength, independence, and moral earnestness from my father, while my mother taught me kindness, love, and gentility. So my question, Andrew and Calvin, if you wish to offer some comments, is it so that fathers are not meant to be mothers, but are meant to be fathers, and that mothers are not meant to be fathers, but are meant to be mothers? What would you offer about this?
Very little. But to begin with, let me ask you to rephrase the question, please. Am I to understand that we are here engaging in a discussion on the interaction between the masculine and feminine in the role of parenthood in terms of father and mothers and their interrelationships and how that might impact not just themselves, but their children?
Our families, our community, our nation, and global.
Well, again, Stuart, you provided me with an interest. Oh, by the way, I'm Andrew Williams Jr., as he may have said. Thank you for allowing me to come into your lap or your living room, as the case might be. But Stuart again has posed an interesting question, one that requires a little bit more than just superficial consideration. In particular, in this role that I currently body as I can see, it's been here all the time that my consciousness has been here. But it would be ingenuous of me to understand or believe or think that it's only the male persona that I embody as a human being, as I understand that there is a balance in nature. And so I have to understand that there has to be a balance of the masculinity and femininity in each one of us to some or greater or lesser degree. But in this particular area, Stuart, I have lived experience of being able to judge the implications of the conversation that you're having. So my good friend to the right of me, Mr. Calvin Pearson, who has been married for more decades than perhaps many of us have been alive, maybe better able to contribute to the conversation. Are you up for that, Calvin?
And is that a wonderful mother?
I'm not that old to begin with. Calvin Pearson, founder of Project 1619 Incorporated. You can find us at project1619.org. My comments are, we live in an imperfect world, imperfect society. If we went back and look at the traditional marriage 50 years ago, 100 years ago, there was a separation between feminine and masculine role and responsibilities. It was up to the masculine figure, the father, to go out and earn the living, to bring in money to raise a family. It was up to the mother's responsibility was to raise the children. But that has changed over a period of time where we now face a society where there are one household parents. The question is, was separated? At one time, I think they were separated, but it was always up to the mother and father to raise their children socially, economically, politically. But what happens when you only have a mother or you only have a father? Roles change. You know, one household family with the mother, she's got to be the mother and the father. She's got to teach that child human traits of manhood and womanhood, and vice versa. If you're living in a household with just a man, he's got to become the mother in a sense of the word. He's got to teach that child, a male child, how to respect women. The female's got to be told how to respect men. So roles keep changing in this society. I would say today, if there was a two household family with a man and a woman, roles are still changing. Today, because of economics and the social environment, oftentimes it takes both parents to go out and work and raise income to support that family. So there's a blur in roles and responsibilities because now the mother and the father both are sharing responsibilities. That 50, 75 years ago, there was a delineation in whose responsibility is it to do this. We now have fathers who are keeping children. A lot of fathers are staying at home and letting their wives go to work. A lot of wives stay home and let the father go to work. So there's a changing society on the upbringing and raising of children that has transpired or transformed itself over the last 50 years or so. If you go back to the 1960s, there were a lot of, when we talk about Black families, there were a lot of Black families where the mother was a homemaker and the dad went to work every day. But those norms are gradually changing because of the socioeconomic today of just being parents, trying to maintain a household and send your children to school. When we talk about the role of social responsibilities, I've always thought it's the responsibility of the mother and the father to teach their children social responsibility. And I don't think that's ever going to change. We need to develop individuals with a sense of social pride, social justice. So there's a lot that a two-parent household and even a one-parent household can do in that regard. But I think that the delineation between this is your job, this is my job, that's no longer a norm. If you want to raise a family today, it takes a mother and a father, or it takes a mother who can do what to do, or it takes a man to do what the mother was responsible to do to make the society work. So those are some of the comments I've got based on what his statement was.
Thank you, Calvin. I want to take up this question of how we work together, because we are defeated. I'm speaking about men and women, husbands and wives. We're defeated when we forget we're on the same side, I believe. And I also believe that there are powers out there in order to, in the old superintendent syndrome, where the superintendent of the prisons gets the prison population fighting against each other so they don't turn together and focus on him. But I think that that's what we're dealing with in society. There are powers and interests that have half, 2/3 of the world's wealth, while the majority of people are struggling to survive. They're making a killing while most people are just trying to make a living. And as Nick Hanauer, one of these individuals, a billionaire, one of the first investors in Amazon, said, the pitchforks are coming. The pitchforks are coming. So these people of such wealth know, consciously or unconsciously, how imbalanced this is, and that there's going to come a point, unless they come to their senses, that the people are going to rise up. So if you've got all the money in the world and all the means in the world and all the possibilities in the world to run the show, you're going to use those resources. And you're going to use those resources to divide and conquer, to turn husbands against wives, wives against husbands, races against one another, so that we don't come together and work together to create an ever more perfect union. So how can we work more effectively together? And I'm asking this, as I said, from the center of the center of the center of the center here in Concord, Massachusetts, and the center of Concord in Monument Square, where the masculine and feminine elements are in a remarkably symbolic way and powerful way illustrated with a road that divides them. Well, I would suggest the following 2 points that I'm going to invite my colleagues here, Andrew and Calvin, to speak to if they wish. The first is to recognize that we're not as free as we may like to imagine we are. I sometimes say to dear friends who I think have the ears to hear, who speak about being free, I sometimes ask them how many seconds in their lives would they say they've been truly free? 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 seconds. And what I mean, when their actions are not dictated by their emotions, their feelings, if you will, their soul body, where their actions aren't dictated by their habits, their customs, if you will, their life or habit body, and where their actions aren't determined by their aches and pains of their physical body. That is, how many times do we act truly freely out of our I am, out of our spirit, out of our true self? 10 seconds, 9 seconds, 8 seconds, 7 seconds. This isn't to dismiss that possibility. Rather, it is to help us become a little more sober. That is, a little more, we've all arrived at different views and attitudes, but have they been arrived at freely? Because can we hope to address the problems, challenges, opportunities before us if we're not doing it freely? As in, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. So Calvin and Andrew, what I would offer for your responses, if you wish, here in the center of the center of the center of the center, is what my years have taught me. And that is, if a man in every thought, word, and deed, every thought, word, and deed were to cherish his wife or the women in his life, then it would be impossible for discord to arise. As long as women, in turn, in every thought, word, and deed, revered men, not deified men, but revered, which is a little more than even respect men. In other words, what I'm suggesting is there's something about the woman, and this has been verified by most women with whom I've talked. When I've asked them, would you rather be cherished or revered? A good number haven't liked that choice, but when they were good enough to actually answer the question, they admitted they'd rather be cherished than revered. And when I've asked my brothers, fellow men, if they'd rather be cherished or revered, that is truly respected, they a little more forthcomingly have said they'd rather be revered. We all want to be cherished. Every man also wants to be cherished, and every woman also wants to be revered. But there may be something distinct to the feminine, if we can consider such a thought, and to the masculine, where what women, at least those with whom I've talked a good number, when it comes down to it, would rather be cherished. Maybe there's something about the human soul that asks to be cherished, and something about the human spirit that asks to be revered. So my question, Andrew and Calvin, is, does that make any sense to you, that if men in every thought, word, and deed were to cherish women, and if women in every thought, word, and deed were to revere, not deify, but revere men, that it'd be impossible for discord to arise, that it'd be impossible for those forces to insinuate themselves into our relations, which divide us and conquer us?
No.
I'll try to answer that question. And what you're asking is, do we live in an utopian society where everything is perfect? And the question of that is no. We will always be an imperfect society. There will always be a division between man and woman. So when you ask the question, should they be revered, I always use the word respected. If you respect a woman, then all the other pronouns that you use are included in respect. The female woman needs to be respected, but we know that's not always the case. There's always discourse in a lot of families based upon financial positions, economics, education. That's the perfect society which we do not live in. And to just ask, well, all men, my opinion, no. There's always going to be division, separation. When we look at this society, I go back to a quote from Martin Luther King, who said, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. In this country, we not have seen the presence of justice. And I don't know when we ever will. The dream of Martin Luther King in 1963 has not been realized. So why do we think now all of a sudden we're going to become a perfect union with imperfect people? When we talk about marriage, when you get married, you don't know what the future of that marriage holds. You hope it works out, but how many people end up being divorced? So that's the reason why I say we live in an imperfect society. As men, we should cherish women. We should cherish the fact that they are the only human beings that can bear children. They are the reason why we are who we are today. So when I talk about cherishing our women, I used to tell people, and I still do, that you need to treat your wife as though they're the queen. And how many women can say that their husband treats them like a queen? Not very many. It was a tradition that started in Africa. You had kings and queens. You treated women as if they were queens. In this country, we don't treat women as queens, although we should. So are we ever going to reach that state of mind here in America? To me, it's a dream. I tell people it's like a fleeting star. You hope that it will be, but it may never will be.
Well, thank you. Let me modify my no to a degree. And that no was simply because it does take a village to raise a child, but it also, I think it's certainly important in having any discussion about relationships between a man and a woman, or a husband and a wife, or a couple. It's critically important to understand that there are dynamics that are impacting that relationship that I believe go far beyond their own individual reverence for each other, or their respect for each other. And those considerations, I think, have to be taken into context when those two people that are making a collaboration to live together as a husband and a wife, and as we're speaking about this particular configuration as a man and woman, and who are dedicating their lives to working together to provide for their families, then I would have to suggest to you, Stuart Sinclair Weeks, that this may be the most critical time ever for there to be counseling in a pre-marriage scenario, as opposed to counseling in a post-marriage scenario. And because you and I just both met a husband and wife couple that are themselves psychologists, it's a valid profession. And with today's changing dynamics, I would recommend and suggest, Stuart, that it's incumbent upon each of those people who are contemplating such a relationship to take the time to familiarize themselves with what they have to deal with individually, and then collectively decide how they want to move forward. Even for those people who are now married, I would again suggest that since nothing is ever perfect, things are always changing, that it might be time for a checkup, or it might be time for a once over, no matter at what stage of life you are. And I believe that would be a recommended course that I would have to suggest, before I myself would come to weigh in on one side or the other, Stuart Sinclair Weeks.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Calvin. What I had tried to express, which may not have been clear enough, is that there's something distinctive about the woman, the feminine, that's different from the masculine. There's plenty that's complementary, but there's also something distinctive. And if that is a thought that makes sense to people, that they can consider, my experience in my conversation with many men and women, friends, is that it has to do, in terms of successful relationships, with men, first and foremost, cherishing women, not respecting. If you cherish, respect comes in a different way that's more perhaps akin to the woman, and the woman revering or respecting the man. In other words, I'm saying there's something about the human soul that seeks to be cherished. And there's something about the human spirit that seeks to be revered. It's not to say the man doesn't have a soul. It's not to say the woman doesn't have a spirit. But if one were to reflect on these constitutional issues, the human constitution, I think they offer us some insights. And so what I suggested, which may or may not be relevant, is that there's no way that discord can enter into a relationship between a man and a woman if the man truly cherishes the woman in every thought, word, and deed, And if the woman truly reveres the man in every thought, word, and deed, that if that can be practiced, these powers that would divide and conquer us no longer have access. So that's the consideration here in the center of the center of the center of the center, with these male elements, the three monuments devoted to men and to war on one side of the street, and these three female elements across the way, three virtually invisible monuments devoted to the woman, to a matriarchal people, and to peace. So if Calvin or Andrew, either of you would like to take up this thread, or we may have for the moment exhausted it, we can do so. What I would add to it is, or what I would reiterate, is it might be the most important consideration we could entertain, speak about, consider, because a way to undermine the community, local, state, national, international, is to undermine the family. And the undermining of the family begins with the father and mother, the husband and the wife, the man and the woman. So I'm not sure there's any more important lesson that can be taught to our children, the generations to come, than this consideration that we're drawing now to its end. So I want to just pick up a thread from earlier, two threads. In one is a friend, I believe, of humankind, the founder of the Waldorf schools in biodynamic agriculture. He addressed the question of women's liberation in one sentence in a book he wrote called The Philosophy of Spiritual Activity. And this was back in the later 1800s, early 1900s. So this is a while ago. And the way he addressed the question of women's liberation was very, very simple. And that's behind this all. He said that every woman should decide for herself. Every woman should decide for herself. For some, that would mean to be able to have a job, a man's job. For others, it would mean to be able to be a mother, to be in the family, that everyone should be honored. Everyone should decide for themselves, because that's what it's about, ultimately, is the self. And the other insight I wish to offer is when we talk about gender issues, we talk about them in a rather materialistic way. Because in our physical bodies, although that's ever more up for grabs these days, men are men and women are women. But we not only have our human skeleton, we can grasp our finger and feel the bone that radiates throughout our body. But if we slip our finger down to our wrist, we have a pulse. We don't just have the physical body, we have a life body. Some call it an etheric body, and that pulses also throughout our body. Some would say that the male's life body is female, and the female's life body is male. We also have a life of feelings and emotions. Some call it a soul body, and those who've considered it say it is both masculine and feminine. And then we have our I am, our spirit, our self, which I believe transcends gender. So the other perspective I would offer, and the Center for American Studies offers, is that to speak of the gender issue on a purely physical plane is, like much today, materialistic, but it's also a powerful reality, one that can be balanced and redeemed when it's fully understood. So I'd like to conclude this session by hearkening back to our gathering this morning at Orchard House, the home of Louise May Alcott and Little Women, something I forgot to mention, but that ties in, I believe. Fathers away at war, mother's having to raise the 4 little women herself. Lines of the book Little Women is Christmas won't be Christmas without gifts. And they go through this moving scenario. Yes, but so Joe says Christmas won't be Christmas without gifts. And I think it's Amy who sniffs how unhappy it is to be poor when others have so much. And then another sister says, well, we have mother and father. And then Joe herself says, well, we don't really have father. He's away at war. And we don't know if he'll ever come back. So there has to be the mother, Marmee, and the mother. And after this conversation, we're at Christmas morning. And they come down, the girls come downstairs and they're excited. They know that there won't be many gifts, but it is Christmas and they're looking forward to a few special gifts. And they come down, but Marmee is not there. And she's not there because she's a town social worker and she's out with a poor family that has even less than they have, a German immigrant family that's impoverished, in a cold home, little food, little warmth. And when Marmee comes back, the girls can tell from the look on her face what they need to do. So they take a deep breath, they wipe away a tear, they gather up their special Christmas breakfast and their gifts, and they follow Marmee out the door, and they bring it to this poor immigrant German family. And when they walk into the home, this battered home, or this impoverished home, when they walk into the home, the mother in bed with a sick child exclaims, "Die Engelkinder," the angel children. And they share their Christmas breakfast, their special Christmas breakfast, and their gifts. And when they return to their orchard house, I see Louisa May pausing for a moment and reflecting as a thought comes to her. And she says, "That's the finest Christmas we've ever had. That's the finest Christmas we ever had." So with that, friends, we draw this session, a challenging but important session, on how we can build bridges between the masculine and the feminine, man and woman together. I pass the baton back to Andrew Williams, Jr.
Well, thank you, Stuart Sinclair Weeks, and thank our audience for joining us. We are in the midst of a Juneteenth 2023 weekend from June the 16th through the 19th, from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please join us again. Our next scheduled event will be coming up in about 2.5 hours, 5 p.m. Let me double check that. Yes, Saturday, 5 p.m. at the Old Manse. That's the home of Emerson and Hawthorne on Monument Street, where we wrestle not against flesh and blood, worldly powers alone. Ephesians 6:12, King James Version. The heart. There was the little yet boundless sphere wherein existed the original wrong, of which the crime and misery of this outward world were merely types. Purify that inner space, and the many shapes of evil that haunt the outward, and which now seem almost our only realities, will turn to shadowy phantoms and vanish of their own accord. Nathaniel Hawthorne. We wish to be settled, but our salvation lies in being unsettled. Ralph Waldo Emerson at the Old Manse. Now I'm going to take a page out of my good friend Stuart Sinclair Weeks book, and I'm going to repeat that just in case you didn't hear it, or in case you want to hear it again. So Saturday at 5 p.m. at the Old Mats, home of Emerson and Hawthorne on Monument Street here in Concord, Massachusetts, where we wrestle not against flesh and blood, worldly powers alone. Ephesians 6:12, King James Version. The heart, there was the little boundless sphere wherein existed the original wrong, of which the crime and misery of this outward world were merely types. Purified that inner sphere and the many shapes of evil that haunt the outward and which now seem almost our only realities will turn to shadowy phantoms and vanish of their own accord, by Nathaniel Hawthorne. We wish to be settled, but our salvation lies in being by Ralph Waldo Emerson. So again, we thank you very much. And we're going to wrap this up with a resharing of our screen. Let you know this is the Juneteenth weekend. Andrew Williams Jr., Conversations with Andrew Williams Jr., and Concordian Conversations. We'll see you soon. Have a fantastic day. Thank you all.